this idea of should software engineers earn salaries now? Um, this, I must admit, is a bit of a clickbaity title, but an important one because I genuinely believe the answer is no. And let me explain why. I'm obviously coming this from a my perspective, the only perspective I can come at anything from. And for the last year and a half, I haven't earned any salary. I've been operating as a fractional CTO, so essentially an independent contractor. I'm in the UK. I've got a limited company, and that's how I, you know, uh, uh, bill my services, and um, I withdraw money from that company, right, as dividends. So I'm not earning any salary um, uh, as a kind of regular income. I'm selling my services and living off the proceeds. So now, what this has been an interesting experience for a bunch of reasons. But it's also something that I think is going to, I believe, become more common, and I'll go into reasons why. And I also think, particularly the way that I've been approaching kind of positioning myself and selling my services, I think first is again something that's going to become, I believe, or I hope, more and more common, and bring some real benefits, not just to anyone doing it, but also I work with other software engineers, particularly like junior engineers. So part of what I like to do and do is when I'm working with, I tend to work primarily with kind of small companies and startups. And, they often want stuff built. They actually want software created for them. And I've learned because of my fractional role, and for those who aren't aware, fractional simply means it's kind of a fancy tech way of saying part-time, right? But traditionally, most fractional CTOs would be working full-time. They'd just be giving a small portion of their time to multiple different clients. Part of the reason I went fractional is to actually work more part-time so I can spend more time with family. But I still work across a range of clients, and so me being hands-on building stuff doesn't feel for me like where I want to be putting my energy and where I can bring the highest leverage. But a lot of my clients want something built, and I do believe, even with AI, and we'll get into that in a second, that there is no substitute for just being hands-on, really engaged with whatever product you're working with and building. And I think that juniors really bring that amazing energy and kind of enthusiasm. And so I tend to place junior engineers into companies, obviously providing them coaching, oversight, technical leadership and strategy to make sure they're kind of building the right thing, but they provide the kind of energy and in-person enthusiasm. Now, I'm not paying those junior engineers a salary. They're essentially working as subcontractors, but in a very specific way. And this is kind of what I wanted to talk about. So first of all, so the main concept here is value-based pricing. Okay. And this is not something I've invented by any stretch of the imagination. And there's lots of kind of proponents of this. The one that I think is that I follow the most and have learned a lot from is Jonathan Stark. And so I'd really recommend checking out he's got a free daily newsletter, and anything he does a lot basically around this concept of value-based pricing. So what is value-based pricing, and why do I think it's so important for software engineers and those working in product and tech to understand, and why do I think it's even more important in the age of AI? So let me break that down. First of all, what is value-based pricing? So traditionally, I think I always find it sometimes easier to define what it isn't. So what is value-based pricing? Normally, if you're a consultant, a lawyer, whatever it might be, people tend to bill by time, by the hour, maybe by the day, right? So you're kind of a freelance software developer, and someone says, "Can you build something for me?" And you go, the traditional way would go, "Okay, let me think about how long that might take. It's going to take 2 weeks, right? How much? And then how much am I billing for my time per hour, per day, whatever it might be. Okay, so we're going to take 2 weeks, 2 weeks times my day rate. That's how much it's going to cost, right? Now, for anyone who's been even remotely following AI, we can already see why this might become to be a problem, right? Because we know that AI massively changes what we can do in a given time. So already and I think this was true even before AI came along, right? The incentives aren't very well aligned here. If I'm paid more to take longer on something, even though I know I can do it quickly, it's very hard. I'm literally being paid not to do it as quickly as possible. And if this is, as I think it is, really expounded by AI, or really stressed even further, what may have taken potentially even days before now could be done in minutes, perhaps, especially if you've got the right setup. Suddenly, AI is a real threat to my business. It's literally going to be eating into my profit margins, right? So we already have, and as I said, I think that misaligned incentive was true before AI, but AI really reveals it even more starkly. So what's the alternative? So this is where value-based pricing comes in. This is how I operate, and I've written about this before, and I can share the links after. And also, by the way, yeah, if anyone has any questions or anything like that, I'm keeping an eye on the live chat, so please do just drop it in. It's really awesome to see so many of you here. And so coming back to, so what is value-based pricing then? So instead of going, well, I'm going to estimate based on how long I think this will take, instead I need to ask some good questions and understand, what is this worth to the business? So they've come and said, we need a new button on this page. Very simple, because we think if we have a button on this page, it's going to drive, convert our conversion rate up a certain percentage. Okay, so why, what would that driving that conversion rate mean for your business? Well, if we think, we're currently got a conversion rate of 2%, and that's giving us, some revenue of, let's call it 20K a month. And we think if we get it up to 5%, we'll get up to 50K a month. Okay, so that's worth 30K a month. And that's, 360,000. Yeah, is my maths right? Over the course of, more. It's a lot of money, right? Let's keep it, no, anyway, it's worth, let's, even if we just did it as, 360,000, I think that's right. So, okay, so you go, right, well, so for this button, and obviously, okay, it's going to be more complex than a button, right? So maybe this is not the best example, but we'll stick with it. You go, okay, well, look, how do you feel about a value-based price where you go, okay, well, for roughly you take, like, we'll figure out what's a tenth. So it's 36K, right? So we'll go, let's say it's more complex than a button. It requires a whole integration to another system, etc. Right? Otherwise, if it's a button, they probably would have done it. But you go, okay, so I'm going to be able to say for a tenth of that price, and for a tenth of the value it's going to provide you, that's how much I'll do it for. And you might offer, there's always more subtlety in this. You might add a few different options, but essentially this is what we're trying to get to. What is it? How much is this worth to you? It could be worth 360K or it would be like 240K in additional revenue, right? And so for a tenth of that, let's say call it 24K, we'll add that button, which is a whole integration. And this allows the company to go, okay, well, but it also forces the question, well, are we really sure that button is going to drive this conversion, etc.? And it may be that this forces a really good conversation, a discovery conversation, to really ask, why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? What impact do we think it's going to have on the business? And to anyone who's worked in the software space, worked with kind of principles like agile, etc., really, these are the exact same questions you'd be asking in any sort of product discovery. If anyone from the business came and said, hey, we want to build something, these are the kind of questions you generally want to be asking. Like, we want to figure out, why are we building this? What's the purpose? And also what's the kind of metric of success? And ultimately, these are usually ROI related, right? Even if it's maybe somewhat removed, it might be like a bit later down the line, like we think this integration will help us land this client, which will unlock something else later down the line. But we should still normally be able to tie, if we're building software for companies, right, for-profit companies, ultimately, usually they want to be making money, and so we should be able to tie the what we're building to some sort of economic output. So, and the what happens? So once you've got this fixed price, right? You go, okay, so we'll do this work for 24K. Now, there's a lot of the challenge here, right, is going, well, hold on, what if we've promised to deliver something that is actually, it's a huge build up. That integration is incredibly complex and it's going to take months and months and months. That's the fear, right? And so again, this is why it forces this why conversation. It aligns incentives on kind of, let's say on my side, on the developer side, to really, dig deep and go, hold on, right, I really want to make sure that whatever I'm building here for this amount is really going to move the needle for you. So actually, is there a way, I can do this where we don't need quite this level of integration? Maybe there's a slightly easier way, but it's still going to result in the conversion rate that you're hoping for and still going to lead to that outcome. And again, this is really aligning incentives well, because what we don't want, and this is, going back to the title, if you're a salaried engineer, you're getting paid to, let's say, write code, right? It's always more than that. It's all the things that go into it, but there can be this tendency, and I'm guilty of it myself. This is why I say it, to just kind of go, well, I'm here, I'm paid every month to kind of come in or work remotely and write this code. You tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? And that's kind of my job. Um, but first of all, we know that AI can now write code pretty well. And so that's no longer enough, right? Just simply being, give me the ticket, I'll go and do it. That's my, clocked in, done. It's not going to cut it anymore, right? AI can do that. So, maybe not quite as well, but for so much cheaper that even if it's only half as good or not as good, it still makes it really, really difficult to justify that kind of attitude of just like, I'm here, I'm paid a salary, give me the ticket and I'll do it. So with that being, so it forces the value-based pricing forces us to think, well, okay, this is how much I'm being paid. This is what the client wants. Am I confident that I can deliver something in that value that helps them achieve that outcome? There is scope, right? And this is important. And it's, it forces a lot of the planning and conversations and, real deep, like thinking to happen up front, which is, to be honest, where it should be. It should have always been the case, but even more so with AI, right? We know that the more context we can give it, the clearer the instructions, the more the more crystalline that vision of what we want to have at the end is, the more we can delegate to AI and validate the results at the end, right? The more uncertainty, the less context we can give it about what our intention and our purposes are, the less likely we are to get a good result. So again, there's this kind of aligning of incentives, right? It forces us to think, what can we do for that, for that economic, for that price, basically. And it might be, what we really need for that, what I can deliver is doing a bunch of user interviews to understand, what might help drive conversion, etc. And that might, we might need to have done that work anyway to be able to deliver this feature. But and also there's a whole thing about value-based pricing, right? Which I'm not going to, I will, as I said, I really recommend Jonathan Stark to go into it. But there's lots of, if the client realize actually, I don't want to pay that much to achieve this. Okay, well, there's flexibility and we go, well, maybe as a first step, we can do for a smaller amount, we can just do some user validation, user testing, which we maybe have needed to do anyway, right? And so we can kind of build and iterate on this. The reason I'm saying should software engineers be paid a salary is what I've found. So with this, and the way I operate is, so I operate on a value-based basis. So here's a project, we'll decide the value to the company, come to a reasonable price. And then once we've got that fixed price, paid up front, and then deliver that. And then if I'm working with a junior engineer, I will split that. So if they're going to be the ones doing the hands-on work, right, I'll split that fixed fee. Let's call it, in this, for a simplicity, let's say it was a project that's 5K. We'll split it according to a certain percentage, and that will depend on essentially how much I'm likely to be involved, how junior they are, how much oversight am I going to need to give them, how much can I just let them get on with it, all these sorts of things. But that's paid upfront to me and to the junior engineer. So it's obviously a high trust exercise, but I only work with people I trust a lot. And then, and then this is where the incentives get really interesting, right? Because let's say they've got their share, for this case, we'll call it 50-50, right? So they've got 2.5K from this project upfront in their bank account. Now, as I said, there's a high trust thing. They could just run off and take that money with them. Obviously, I hope they won't do that because I vetted them and I trust them. But also, they want, hopefully, will want future work, right? So they want to do a good job. They're still incentivized to do a good job. And generally, in my experience, and certainly software engineers I work with, they like building stuff. They like helping people, right? So they want to build something good. So they are likely to. So they're going to go off. Obviously, I'll support, and they go off and build the thing. And this is where it gets interesting with AI, right? Because if they find, if they can find ways of delivering that quality of product that the client expects, but they can now do it, far faster. And this was true before, right? Every developer had their favorite shortcut set up, and they had their developer experience, developer environment set up in a way to optimize their status flow, right? Now, same with AI, if we can set those systems up to be able to deliver this faster, then essentially they are maximizing their day rate, right? Like if they can deliver it in a day, they've now been paid whatever it's 2.5K for a day's worth of work, and maybe they did it in 10 minutes. In a sense, it doesn't matter because the client knows what their outcome is. They know what they care about. They know what it means for their business, and so in a sense, it's never been the case, but they don't care how long it takes. They just care that they get what they wanted, and it drives the results that that they expected. If it results in that conversion on the other side, and they're making money, they're very happy. They don't care if it took 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days, right? As long as it was done. So so this is a really nice alignment of incentive. Now, as I said, I work primarily with junior engineers, right? Now, this is interesting because obviously, the more experienced you are, generally the faster you are. You know exactly how to do something. Maybe something that could be a quite complex problem because for you, because of the experience you have, because of the systems you have set up, you can do it super effectively, right? Now, for a junior engineer, there's going to be an element of learning, right? And frankly, with AI, as I've said, we're all juniors now, so there's an element where we're all learning. There's always a new tool. Even if you had a new project come in just a few weeks later, there's probably some brand new AI framework or agentic coding, like IDE, whatever that you could test out, right? And so again, there's an incentive here where if we decide to experiment and we decide to try out different stuff and it takes us a bit longer, well, we're not billing a client for that, right? Like that essentially is eating into my time, but that's okay because I can balance it. I know how much I've been paid. I know how I can judge myself if I'm a responsible adult, how much I'm willing to, as long as I'm confident I can get the thing done. Do I want to experiment a bit here? Yes, no. There's always going to be contextual circumstances that help us decide it, but that's okay. I want to take a bit longer to experiment because I know that it might take me a bit longer on this project, but perhaps it will make future projects far faster, right? So I'm willing to kind of take that hit of taking a bit longer. So I guess the key thing I want to outline here is this idea that with this idea of like value-based pricing, it actually aligns incentives really well. And I think that ultimately what this boils down to is something I talk, is almost one of the core things I try and talk about on, on these chats and also in my writing, which is, bringing a greater economic understanding of what we're doing as software engineers to our practice, right? Because, and this is why, I found Kent Beck's optionality idea and so transformative in my thinking because it named what was always present, which is the economic underpinnings of what we do in software engineering. It is a balance between delivering $10 tomorrow, investing in optionality, making software easier to change, like making it better software, versus usually the business pressure on the other side of we need this feature now. Like the quicker we get this feature on the site, the quicker we can sell it or, land an enterprise client or whatever it is. And there's this tension, right? We can deliver that today, but it's a bit hacky and it makes the system harder to change in the future, but we get it quicker. or we do it the right way, or like reinvest in future optionality, make the system easier to change in the future, but it takes a bit longer. And this is the tension and the trade-off we're working within. So that was always present. But when you're a salaried engineer, it's very easy to fall into just essentially thinking about the optionality piece. I'm getting my salary and I'm the only one who can think about optionality, who can think about how do I make this software easier to change. No CEO is going to be banging on the door saying, hey, when are you going to refactor that component? Only an engineer can have that view of how easy a system is to change. And when you're a salaried engineer, it's very easy to just go, well, that's what I'm going to focus on. Like, it makes my life easier. I want to make software easier to change. I'm getting my salary every, whatever. So, and yeah, and also again, with the problem with salary and with the AI thing is that if I do more, if I become like the 10x engineer that, LinkedIn says I should be, or that the CEO or my manager is saying we've got to do to adopt all these tools, right? I don't really see any of the benefit of that, right? I'm probably just going to have to end up doing 10 times more work. Maybe I've gone through a round of layoffs. They've laid off loads of people. Now I'm expected to take over their stuff and use AI. It's not really that, it's pretty demoralizing, right? It's like, there's not, the incentives are misaligned here. I'm not really reaping much benefit. All that benefit, all that time accrued, if I could get time back, that's one thing. But most companies don't want to do that because they're concerned, rightly, that any competition that they have whose employees don't do that will outperform them. So I'm not getting that time back, and I'm not getting much money back. I'm not getting paid much more. Like, I might be doing 10x more, but now this is just part of my job. So it's really disempowering and demotivating, right? And so this idea of, well, actually, by being crystal clear, and look, I'm not saying everyone should quit their salary jobs and become, freelance software engineers and do value-based pricing, right? That's not feasible. I do think more and more people will. I think as more and more people get dissatisfied with the way that kind of corporate structure and the way salaries work, precisely for the kind of the reason I've just described, as people get more dissatisfied with that, I think they may look to go, well, you know what? I'm sick of this. Like, I want value that I create and efficiencies that I gain by mastering these new tools with AI to actually accrue to me rather than like the company I work for, without seeing much benefit. Like if you work in a company where they're going to be prepared to give you 50%, 100% pay rises based on your, productivity, that's incredible. And those are probably the smart companies, because that is the level that you would need to do to really keep and incentivize people who are working this way. But my experience, it's never going to happen, right? I've never experienced that. So, but even if you're within a company, and I had a bit of experience with this in my last kind of full-time role, of finding ways to align your like some part of your compensation aligned with the performance of the company. So obviously, like, equity is like a classic one, right? And again, mainly applicable to startups, but that's really important. But even in kind of shorter term things of like understanding the team you're operating in, what the profit and loss of that looks like. Like, okay, I work on this feature. How much does this feature actually like make for the company, right? And if you go, well, if I can increase my output and increase, what this feature does, maybe as an increase conversion rate, whatever it might be, right? If I can increase the revenue that I'm responsible for in this part of the company, then I want to see some sliver of that, so that I'm incentivized to really think about, is this the best use? Because what this really does ultimately is figure out that it really forces us to confront this trade-off of, building it right to gain future value versus building it, in a way that delivers something today, right? And actually, it's really important for us as engineers to feel that, like, that push, and also that motivation to get something delivered today, like, because at the moment, in a lot of companies, we don't, apart from of course, like a sense of like professional satisfaction of seeing that feature go live. That is great. We do, but I think the the economic incentives just aren't there. So I guess all that to say, to kind of bring this back, I don't think value-based pricing is for everyone, but at least in my experience and working, and not just for me, working with like other engineers, and essentially I've been like doing it to them, right? I'm saying like, this is how I operate. You're going to be paid up front. This is the fixed fee for what we're going to be delivering. And then it's over to you to figure out, how long you want to spend on doing it in terms of, obviously it has to be delivered to this standard. Like we've agreed the scope, right? But in terms of then, how long do maybe you spend an extra couple of evenings on it because you want to try out our tool and see if that, it helps on a particular approach or something like that. That's fine. That's on you. If you've got a system set up where you can deliver it super quickly, that's also awesome. It also really forces there's a lot of value to software engineers, I think, for this. There's actually a lot of value to the business as well, because I think actually having a very clear look, this is why we're doing it. This is what we think that a return on investment will be, and this is how much it's going to cost, and that's it, right? Like if things take longer or whatever, you're not going to pay more. This is it. Companies love that, right? No one, no, regardless of whether they're paying a contract or paying for a dev team, the worst thing that they have is, oh yeah, well, this project we thought was going to take 2 months, now it's taking 3 months, now it's taking 4 months. And for them, it's that every month it takes it's burning more cash, right? So this really, it's works great for the company as well, but it also really forces them to go, well, do we want to pay this much upfront for this thing? Like, is it that important for us right now? Is it? And so it really forces the conversation that we should be having anyway, no matter what kind of company, no matter if you're salaried or if you're freelance. These are precisely the conversations we should have. But incentives rule the world, right? And I think Charlie Munger's very, very famous on this, saying like everything is incentives, right? So if you like, we know that technically, or it should be done this way in most companies, but often it's not, because this incentives aren't aligned. But it's not, and salaries aren't very well aligned with the changes, the economic changes that AI is bringing. And so this idea of value-based pricing, I think, is super important to understand. It may not be something you practice, but it can be something that you can bring in, even if you are a salaried employee, of going, how can I get a slice of the value that I'm giving to my company that's more variable, right? That's unbounded, because this is the key thing ultimately, right? That salaries are bounded. This is how much I earn in a year. That's it. Maybe you have so there's bonuses, there's equity. That's kind of more an unbounded. Once you get into value-based pricing, it's kind of unbounded, because there's a fixed price, but then you control the time scale, right? And so, as I said, you could effectively earn a lot quite quickly if you manage to deliver things in a tighter time frame. And there is this balance. I think the key critiques, as I imagine it, are well, what does that mean for like ongoing work when you have to maintain stuff? This is fine if it's a one-off project. What does this mean for how would this work if there was it said like bugs and further work that needs to be done. There's lots of nuance to this, right? But I guess it's just bringing, and so, but to bring it back to this, what I really want to highlight is this idea that I do think that the current salary system really, like pure salary, right, with no equity or bonus or anything like that, I think really is going to really struggle under the weight that AI changes are going to bring to the software industry. And so I think this kind of approach is going to become potentially more increasingly common, precisely because I think more and more people might actually move into more sort of independent, self-employed modes of working, because it brings the flexibility as well. For me, as I mentioned right at the beginning, moving into fractional, there came a point where I'm not that interested in earning that much more money, right? Once I hit a certain level of income and I can provide for my family, and I have a certain level of lifestyle that I feel comfortable with, I bought myself a pan of chocolate this morning. Once I can do that without having to worry about it, I'm actually pretty happy, and I'd much rather get time back than, I'd much rather get a day back rather than a 20% raise, right? And I think that this is one of the things that this really brings. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you everyone for joining. This is like by far the most people who've ever joined for a live. So genuinely really appreciate it. And if you're listening back, thank you for listening in. And yeah, as always, any comments or questions, feel free to leave a comment or DM me. And yeah, make sure to sign up for any future stuff if you found it interesting. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye.